I'm Dan Schaubel, managing partner of Workplace Intelligence, and in this series, I talk to leaders about their perspectives on hybrid work. My guest today is Pieter Omvlee, the CEO of Sketch, a fully featured collaborative platform for designers. Pieter, it's so great to have you here.
I'm happy to be here. Nice to talk to you today.
Why did Sketch originally decide to be a fully remote company when you started it back in 2010, and how has that decision impacted hiring and retention since?
We started as a fully remote company because, well, I back then I was living in London. My partner was living in Portugal, and we never really had the idea that. I mean, from day one, our goal was to build an app. It was not to start like a big business. We had no idea how it would do. So from day one, it's like, well, let's just start working together and see what happens. It wasn't, we hadn't plans big enough that we would immediately say, okay, we're going to move and pick an office. And no, we just started working together over what was back then iChat, I think, and collaborated that way. As the company, as it as we released the product and it became clear that it was a bigger success than we had initially planned for, we started looking for people to help us. We found that actually it worked out great for us being remote. Like we worked well together, but being remote also meant that we could find talent in places where companies traditionally weren't looking. And then that's been a great thing for us.
Oh, I think it's a great thing for a lot of companies. It's expanded the scope of hiring. You
Yeah,
know, jobs are
absolutely.
going to people instead of people going to jobs more and more, and therefore you can recruit people from around the world, and you're
No,
more
indeed.
or less looking for a good cultural fit and people who can do the job and have the skill set. So I think that can give you a competitive advantage. So in a sense, would you say that you kind of fell into remote work because your business partner was in a different area, but realized that there were a lot of benefits to remote work as you started to grow? But what were some of the downsides?
No, it indeed, we definitely sort of fell into it by a happy accident. If we would have picked a location to live, it might have been, for example, London, and well, then you have to compete with all the other companies that are fishing for talent in London. So in that aspect, it were great. Downsides. Well, I have to start by saying that I've never worked in an office before. Like we started Sketch, I started Sketch right out of university, so I have no there's no comparison I can make with that with an actual office job, sort of. So there may be downsides that I'm not aware of, but for us it seems to work great. Like people often flag things as company culture and how can you really get to know people, but I think I've, I think that works just fine over Slack or meetings. You do get to know people. So if I had to point out downsides, I'm not really sure I have any ready.
Yeah, and talking about culture, how do you describe the culture you've built at your company and how has it developed over time?
So it starts. I think it starts with trust. Like when Emmanuel and I started working together, my co-founder, we had never met in person. Um, and we just had to trust from each other that we did the work that we had to do to get this app out. And you can't really look over people's shoulders while they work. You don't really want to. Um, so trust is, I think, the key thing upon which this thing is built, and you need to trust people to employ the right initiatives because you can't be there all the time either holding their hands. So I think those are two very important things. What we've what we've done is have a really strong culture around writing. We do have calls from time to time, but we put everything in writing so that people in different time zones or who might happen to have other appointments that conflict can always read back on things. And you don't need to be in a certain meeting to know what is going on. And I think that really helps keep things flowing.
Definitely. But one of the big difficulties I find with a lot of people I talk to at your level is onboarding employees because it does take time to build trust. It's not like you trust someone immediately when
Mm-hmm.
you meet them, usually. And it took a while for you to build up that trust and rapport with your co founder and the other people that you ended up hiring. How have you onboarding people remotely, and what do you find works best?
Um, well, what really works well for us is we have this one central repository of information where we store all the projects that we're working on, but also all the guidelines and the way you're supposed to do certain things. You can always look it up. We try to prepare people's onboarding in detail as well, so people can always read back of what is expected of them. In the first day, in the first week, the first task, like go read this, go do that, go prepare for this. But I think that seems to be working quite well. And I think trust is something that people respond well to if you give it to them. If in the first days you really you're too much on top of things, it can also backfire in a way.
Yeah, and it just seems like a lot of leaders need to just communicate more often to build that trust because they don't
Yeah.
see their colleagues. What are some of the biggest mindset and management challenges that you face when overseeing the remote workers?
Right. So you obviously you're not in an office where it's easy to both look upon the employees and sort of make yourself seen by walking around. Management by walking around isn't really something that you can do, but it's also probably something you shouldn't be doing in the first place. You have to again trust. You have to lead by example, and you have to be really clear in your communication. And um, I think it's easy to do this wrong. Like if you communicate something in person, it's easy to add to add gestures and emphasis and clarify or soften things up with just body language. And if you have a strong written culture that just doesn't work, and it can be tempting to sort of do not say the things as clear as you want to because you don't want to hurt someone's feelings or things like that. But like there's so much room for misunderstanding in written word. I think like clarity of communication is really important, and together with clarity, just repeating it a lot. Um, yeah, being really clear what you expect of people is, I think, key.
I agree. I think setting expectations is really key. One of the things that a lot of leaders have said in terms of the ones I've talked to are, you have to make it social as well. If you just talk about business and work, it's hard to form those bonds and build the trust. Sometimes talking
Yeah.
about hobbies and, shared interests and things you've been through is kind of a gateway to building more of that trust that you talk about. Are there any traditions that have helped you and your employees get to know each other better?
Yeah, no, we when people get started, they're always assigned also a buddy, like someone who sort of works in the same area as they do. They've been there before, so they can lead them through the various through the various onboarding procedures, get familiar with the company culture. We have a lot of channels on Slack about non-related work, from like your standard off topic to like food and board games and yoga and I don't know what else. There's a lot, and people do hang out there a lot, and I think it's a really important way for people to get to know each other, and that just builds trust and understanding among people. We organize sort of casual sessions where people can learn skills about that are not related to work at all. Just a nice excuse for people to just get to know each other. We had a summer photography contest. We also had a cooking session and storytelling thing, which are not related to work at all, but just a nice way for people to socialize and get to know each other. Of course, before all of this COVID stuff hit, we did have our yearly meetings and people would meet in person, but of course we've not done that for a while now.
And the other thing you do is an annual company meetup. I think this is really smart. How do you
Yeah.
structure that meetup so you can foster these interpersonal relationships with employees?
Yeah, so when we started doing this, the original idea was like, we'll get together and we will talk about all the things that we need to do, and we make plans, and then we go back home and execute on those plans, and that just never worked. Because while you're in the same room, it feels great, and you think, oh, we've decided this and that is great, and then you are back in your hotel room, or the week after, you're back behind your computer and think, well, that can't work because something. So those fruitful discussions, however fun they were never really all that productive. So the recent ones we've done much more for social activities. We place more emphasis on like fun team building things, but also like, of course, group dinners in the evening, and many people even brought their partners along to socialize with the rest of the team. And of course, we fill part of the day with product related discussions, and because it would be a shame not to do that while you're there in person. But that's not the goal anymore. It's just an excuse sort of to get the people together.
It's smart. Yeah, I mean, relationships anchor people to the company, and people just, if you're spending so much time on Zoom calls every day with someone, it's helpful to see them in person at some point.
Absolutely.
So at least they meet once a year to kind of reinforce corporate cultures, values, get everyone on the same page, and continue to foster those relationships. One of the big challenges that's happened over the past few years for companies that were not always remote, especially, is individuals who are struggling balancing personal and professional lives, because especially if you're working at home, they're intertwined, right? There's fewer boundaries. How do you ensure that your remote workers can balance their personal and professional lives?
Quick thing on the previous question about meetups. Like, after what happens every time after those meetups, that you notice that people just communicate more and better, because there's that understanding. They now know the person on the other side of that Slack message, and that helps enormously. About making sure people don't overcommit or undercommit to work. It's hard to really know that from distance, and we've had people who thought they could get away with not really doing any work, and at first it works, but eventually you find out. People overcommitting to work might be a more common problem, in fact, and so we really try to stick. For example, we have an unlimited holidays policy. Not that people sort of take us up on that, but just to really show, like, okay, take the time for yourself, take the time to recharge. Like, we want you to be well at work, and that means being well outside work as well. We have flexible work hours as well. We try to lead there by example whenever we can. So if you have like a haircut appointment during work hours, that's fine. And of course, for each manager is supposed to check in with their people as well to make sure that they actually do take us up on those holidays and take enough time off. And I think all of that together works quite well. Sometimes you have to tell people, really, no, go away. I don't want to see you next week, but it doesn't happen too often.
Yeah, because a lot of workers can get burned out, and
yeah,
that's probably way more common now than someone just not doing work because people want to keep their job. But how do you evaluate the health of your remote work environment? You talked a lot about, setting expectations, building relationships, providing resources. But I think measurement is also key, especially, that's something that's been consistent from the other CEOs I've talked to.
Yeah, no, indeed. Well, as I said, all team managers are supposed to check in with their employees. With the people under them. But there's also we have from time to time there are official anonymous surveys going out just to check in with everybody how they're feeling. Whether they're happy in their role, whether something we need for them, we ensure them that this is all anonymous. But if they want, they can reach out for help. We have an official mental health program as well, whereas anyone within the company can seek help if they need to. And I think that's the right way to do it. Like the formal surveys help, but if people need help, especially in the last 2 years, where so much around work being just weird, I think it's really helped people the ability to seek help, whereas they might not have done so just by themselves. But if we make that available, people do take you up on it.
Well, I think that's also happening because the stigma around mental health and burnout has been wiped out a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Because over the past 2 years, everyone suffered. So you suffered, I suffered. It's easy for someone to have more courage to go and seek support. And so it's good that you are providing that support with your mental health
Indeed.
program.
Indeed. Especially like the people in the various countries that we work with, like some of their lockdown measures were so restrictive. You could almost feel people going mad, being locked up in their apartment, and everybody had that. So everybody recognizes that and the problems that brings. So no, indeed.
Absolutely. And what advice would you give to companies embracing permanent remote work or even hybrid work?
It's I think it's actually easier to go completely remote than going hybrid. It may seem like a step off the cliff, but I think the consistency sort of helps if you have a team in the office and a team not in the office. I fear that it would lead to sort of two groups of people, where if you're in the office, you do get more information than if you're out. We experience this in a very, very small way in Sketch when I rented like a very small office in a co-working space together with someone else who happened to live in the same city. And even just us two, you could notice that we were discussing things that we then forgot to relay back to the rest of the team. And I can only imagine it gets worse if you have like a large group of people in office and a large group of people out. So I think the consistency of just having everybody remote really helps. Everybody has to work in the same way.
That's a really good point, because it does create a two-tiered system. People in the office could get closer to power, aka senior leadership, while as the remote workers will have less access. There are some benefits to that, and we found that remote workers are less trusted than office workers, when compared.
Right.
But I think there's also benefits too, right? And a bigger conclusion is that not every company is the same. So what works for you at your company might not work for someone in another company. So it's a little all over the place based on geography, industry, company leader, and various other things.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the future is for remote work or hybrid work?
We've seen that some companies were keen to get everybody back into the office, like as soon as it was allowed, and others were happy to keep it this way. I don't think many companies have the luxury of just mandating that everybody goes back into the office. Like is in our situation, we've been able to hire amazing people because, and people have come to Sketch specifically because they like remote work. They have experience and they wouldn't want to go back to working in an office. And I think we've all read those stories from small to large companies where they wanted people back in the office, but the employees didn't want to. And um, I think retention of talent is the biggest problem for many companies out there, and just adding the unnecessary limit of location into the mix really doesn't help. So yeah, I think it is definitely here to stay, and I think it will be a shame for a company not to investigate the possibility.
Yeah, and in summary, what you're saying is if you want to be competitive when it comes to talent in the future, flexibility and remote work are going to be very, very important to be able to recruit and retain
Indeed.
talent. And as you know, as a CEO, you can't just have a high attrition rate and grow as a company. So that's why, if
Indeed.
someone's in an interview, they're not just asking about maybe salary or, benefits or what it's like to work at a company. They're also asking about work environment and flexibility more so now than they were even 2 years ago.
Indeed. 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 No,
Thank
I
you
think
so. Yep.
I think, or as a famous example, maybe Apple. Like I think there are many people who would like to work for Apple, but to move to San Francisco and live move to California and live in Cupertino. Um, I think it's I think it's off-putting, and I think it's a shame for Apple themselves to limit the talent pool to people who happen to live there already, who are willing to. Like we've hired many people with already, I mean, who are married, have children. Their entire life is where they are. Like, why on earth would they move to the other side of the world just to work at your company? I mean, we do exciting things at Sketch, but let's be real, right?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives, Pieter.
Sure. I was happy to. Thanks for the talk.